Alright, hello everyone. Welcome to the PMR 101, your lecture. You are all here because you want to learn how to give the best speech and the last speech in the debate. It's the most fun because it's the last. I personally loved this speech because I would just sit there crapping myself during the block, and then I realized I had a whole bunch of time to think about what I wanted to say. And I would advise that you do the same. The fact that you get the entire 12-minute block to figure out what you're going to do in response to what they are doing during that time, I think is super helpful. And it's where you get to utilize that sweet aft-side bias where you speak first and last because, it helps you control the round and seem like you're winning because you get the last word, and the last word is the best word. All the PMs know this. So, what is the PMR? It is, as stated, the last speech in the debate. It happens for 5 minutes, 5 long, sweaty minutes, or it could be less if you're super strategic and just give a ball in 3-minute PMR and sit down. That's pretty cool, but it takes a while to get to that point. I don't think I ever sat down early. I was always scared of not covering something. So it's the best chance to kind of show up the block. They commit to a strategy for 12 minutes, and then you get to use the PMR to say, that's cool, but you missed this argument, and you also missed this argument, and so you're going to lose. And that is fun. It's fun to make the other team look like they're losing. And when you hear those sighs come out of the MO and the LO, you know you've done your job. So that's my advice, is listen for the sighs. It's also time to be sneaky, because you have a 5-minute speech to answer 12 minutes, so you can't answer everything that they said. What you can do is commit to a strategy that they might have missed, and then spend 5 minutes making them feel super silly for missing that argument. And sometimes it's a small thing, and sometimes it's an entire advantage that they didn't answer. It really depends. But strategy definitely plays into the PMR. In the same way that the MO is a speech where you collapse down to an argument from the LO, the PMR is a chance where you want to take a few crucial arguments from the MG and use them to win the round, in spite of the fact that there's that time trade-off. So, the main roles of the PMR, first, of course, secure your offense. You can't win a round without offense, so it's pretty important that you get that. You need to extend access to your impacts, make sure that you're controlling the uniqueness for your advantage. A link for your advantage is sufficient. I think a common trap is to try to win every link or every argument on an advantage, and sometimes that's just not in your best interest. If you have one crucial link argument that gets you enough solvency for the advantage, commit to that and win the hell out of it versus trying to answer the 5 or 6 points that a certain team might have on the link level on an advantage. Just go for secure the access to it, secure your plan solvency. That's pretty crucial, because if the plan doesn't solve, it doesn't matter what you say on your link story. And use that so that you have that impact to compare at the end of the round to the other offense that they have. You want to neutralize your frenemy's offense. That's pretty important, because otherwise they will win. And I think, again, keeping with the theme of being efficient and lean in the PMR, because you only have so much time, smart defensive arguments are your friend. Try to make as many short but smart defensive arguments. Memorize your favorite types of arguments to go for and prepare for the round. I'll talk a little bit about that in the later slides. But pick the arguments that get you the most for the least that you have to say. And similarly, if you can group arguments, do it. It's pretty common for certain types of the flow, certain parts of the flow, you can use the same argument to take out an approach that the negative did. So whenever you can make your job easier and spend less time on something, do that. And of course, outweighing, which is naturally, on the impacts going to be pretty crucial, that you can outweigh their impacts, but also comparison of link stories and saying, they may be winning 4 arguments, but their 4 arguments only get them this much, and our single argument is going to outweigh. Comparison, again, that's essentially what that is. Super important to be able to compare arguments, and I think where the PMR falls apart in a lot of cases, where it could be, the round-winning speech, is that teams fail to compare. They focus on winning the arguments on the flow, and they get their head stuck in the specific wording of arguments, but they don't step back and say, if I were the judge, how would I compare these 2 arguments? The explicit comparison of your offense and their offense, and how you get there, the links, and so on, or it's super important to make the story clear to the judge. You want to tell them a compelling story that they will believe and say, there was no way that, even with the block spending 12 minutes going for this, that I could vote for that, because when you put them side by side, the AF has clearly won. So using explicit comparison arguments, or explicit comparison language is helpful, and setting aside a point in time in the PMR to say, this is what our offense is, this is what their offense is crucial, and also winning. So this is the Joe Hyken formula to the PMR. This is from an FB convo that we had like a year and a half ago, and I was like, I'm kind of struggling with the PMR, Joe, and I'd seen him give some pretty sweet ones, and so he was like, here's what you do, and so it's a little transcribed, but again, pick your offense and make sure you get it. So if you're going for one advantage, then make sure you do everything possible to secure that advantage. Answer their defense on it, answer their solvency, their arguments as to why the plan doesn't solve, and make sure that there's no way you could lose it. Also, anticipating the ways out. This is specifically on your piece of offense. Figure out what this is why listening to the LOR is super important. Again, the PMR is cool because you get so much time to write and think about your strategy, but a common mistake is for people to just tune out the LOR. And that's not a smart thing to do, because the LOR is, if it's a good LOR, it's telling the judge how the judge is going to vote for the negative team. So that speech will condense the types of arguments that you will lose on, because they're the types of arguments that the block is going for. And I think it's super helpful to listen to those arguments, especially when you're evaluating what you're going to go for. Think about what arguments it is. So if on the advantage, say that they read a ton of impact defense and they go for a couple impact defense arguments, you obviously want to extend stuff from your own shell to compare against that, but if you don't even address or directly address their impact defense and just kind of hope that the judge will compare your arguments to theirs, that's not going to be very helpful. You want to be very explicit in saying, look, the LOR tried to do this, the PMR, we are going to win because their arguments are insufficient, specifically addressing the ones that they read. So the LOR is always mentioned as, or is always talked about as a speech where you shut doors. The PMR can be thought of as your opportunity to kick down doors, and you should do that. So stopping them from getting away with their defense is important, and then you compare so this is still on your sheet of paper, say on your advantage that you're going for. You compare what offensive arguments you have and the defense, and you explain why their defense is just not good enough to outweigh your access to that offense. So now you've got the reasons why you win. That's steps 1 through 5, and then steps 5 through 8 are how you make sure that, or 6 through 8, are how you make sure that they don't beat you with what they're going for. So you go to whatever piece of offense they try to extend in the block. Say they sit on politics. That's where you go next. You go to politics and say, what arguments did they extend? What was the link scenario that they went for? What do we have from the MG to leverage against that? And go back to specific arguments, again, being as efficient as possible in saying, these are the two that are going to answer their link story. They thought they understood it in the block, but they went all in on this argument. They didn't answer something from the MG. Leveraging concessions is super, super crucial in the PMR. If you can point out an argument that they just missed and did not respond to, then that's going to give you a lot of access in stopping their access to offense. Comparison, again, comparing on this sheet of paper. So they went for politics, they extended this link argument, we had these no links and these non-uniques. These are going to be reasons why they don't get access to their impact scenario. Make sure that comparison is very explicit. Similarly to the MO, one of the things in the MO that is really important is to do regional overviews, I think is the term. So when you get to a sheet of paper, you say, here's the story on politics. They go for a link scenario, but our no link, well, if you were the MO, you would say it differently. You would say the MG didn't properly answer the link. This is the link story. We were winning uniqueness arguments. The impact is extinction, game over. And then you would actually go through and explain how those arguments work. Similarly, I think in the PMR, having those types of framing discussions, like a little bit of brief framing language on each sheet of paper is super helpful for the critics, so they know, one, it perceptually helps because you're controlling the round, and two, they know which arguments you're going to be going for, and they don't have to wade through stuff at the end of the round and just kind of see what's made it to the end of the round. They know which way you want them to think about your offense. So compare on each sheet of paper, regional overviews on each sheet or each part of the debate are helpful, and then at the end, that macro comparison where you say, this is the offense that's left for the AF, this is the offense for the negative, vote affirmative for these reasons. And that's impact calculus as well, which I'll talk about. Hinted at this a little bit, but again, the PMR is the speech to be strategic. The MO is its own kind of strategy speech because you get to pick something and then put it out there to win out of whatever the MG had to answer out of the LOC. The PMR is a different kind of strategy where you have a small amount of time to answer a lot of things that were said. So you have to keep in mind that being strategic and sometimes making strategic concessions is super crucial. It's one of the most important things for the PMR. Sometimes that means that, for example, you don't spend time trying to debate one of your advantages because the counterplane clearly solves the advantage. What you'd want to do in that instance is go super, super hard for your other one and explain the fact that the counterplane doesn't solve advantage 2, and they'd be going for disadvantage as well. The advantage 2 is going to outweigh the disad no matter what. So in this world, the plan and the counterplan both solve advantage 1. The counterplan avoids the disadvantage. The plan supposedly causes the disadvantage. You would argue that the extent to which the disad might happen and the impact of that is going to be outweighed by the advantage 2, even if the counterplan gets most of advantage 1. That's something where you no longer have to talk about a significant part of the debate because all you're going is for this one piece of offense. You're sitting on something. Yeah.
But you'd of course bring up very briefly how you're not even going to go over advantage 1 because the counterplan and the plan both solve for that. So you'd make that statement and then move on to discuss the whole advantage 2 thing and how the impacts of the disadvantage are outweighed by the advantage 2?
Yeah, exactly. So what overviews are helpful for doing this. A lot of times you'll see teams when they realize that they're behind on the disad debate and they can't spend time talking about advantage 1, they're going to sit on advantage 2. They'll say, not even going for advantage 1, obviously the counterplane solves, doesn't matter because that advantage 2 is going to outweigh the disad. That's like an overview at the top of the speech that says, here's what the PMR is going to do. And then the critic's like, cool, the only sheets of paper I really have to pay attention to are the advantage 2 and the disad. And you'll want to cover other arguments and cut against, say you have extra time and there's some question as to whether advantage 2 is going to outweigh the disad. Say that, there are some concessions in the MG, so the disad has a fairly high probability of occurring, and the impact is similar to the advantage 2. In that case, you could say, you could go hard for no solvency arguments on the
disadvantage is similar to the advantage 2, right?
Yeah, so they're similar magnitude, and the disad is fairly probable. So and your advantage 2, you have a decent probability of solving. So it's there might be a wash. Then you might go hard for counterplane doesn't solve advantage 1, in the hope that that solvency deficit for advantage 1 is kind of a tiebreaker. So it's taking it back to now it's a wash between the disad and advantage 2. If nothing else, realize the counterplane doesn't solve, the plan does solve advantage 1. That's how you'd use it as a tiebreaker. But I think most of the time, you're best off thinking about what the biggest impact and most substantial impact that you can solve for is, going hard for that, and then comparing it to their biggest impact as well, and letting the other parts of the debate go.
What if the impacts are the exact same? I've been in rounds where literally both impacts are they're arguing the same thing, death, destruction, nuclear war, extinction.
There are a couple different ways to go about that. I think specificity, obviously with something like extinction, then it's the same impact, same terminal impact, but there are lots of different ways to get there. There are a lot of steps to extinction, and if you can make arguments as to why the specific way that your impact happens versus their impact, why yours is more probable.
There's a potential chance that we won't do that with one little.
Exactly. Yeah. So one example might be that you solve flashpoint conflict between two states that are both nuclear powers and are likely to go to war with each other. Probably not very likely to happen, but in debate land, you have that scenario versus warming, which eventually leads to extinction, but it's over a very long period of time, and you can make arguments. We'd be extending arguments from the MG, hopefully, that explain why extinction happens 200, 500 years from now or something, and as a result of warming, whereas extinction from nuclear war happens tomorrow. Yeah. That's one example of that. And then this is also where impact calculus and weighing comes in. You can say warming is reversible. Conflict between these two states is not reversible. That's a kind of weighing argument that you get to make in the PMR because it's not really a new argument. It's just a way of framing the impacts. You can do that, and you can also compare the strength of link. Probability that Congress freaks out and the Republicans don't pass this bill, and then everybody dies Russia goes to war with
Probably
us.
not gonna happen.
Yeah, so you want to control the strength of link debate. Even if they have extinction and you have extinction, mitigate their access to extinction. Talk about why it is not probable that that will happen in their world, whereas the plan can 100% solve. So, yeah.
In regards to the global strategy, how exactly would you use like a golden turn in your PMR? Because like I understand what it is, but
Yeah.
how exactly do you implement it?
Yeah, so golden answers refers to the idea that when the MO brings up a new argument, you get to say whatever you want in the PMR to respond to it. The thing about it is that it still has to be an argument that wins. Like there has to be enough offense attached to it to outweigh whatever they're going for. I'm trying to think of an example. Anybody else think of an example of like a new MO argument that you could turn? I mean, yeah, what's up,
So
Corey?
like if the MO puts a new impact scenario on
Yeah.
one of your disads, you could read impact turns.
Yeah.
If it was strategic.
I think that's the most common one. That also sometimes happens with theory if they read new impacts or like they read new fairness arguments, they add a fairness voter in the MO, then you can impact turn fairness if you want to and just say, look, all that stuff you did doesn't matter because you get to answer it. But yeah, impact turns on a disad can be super crucial. I think we also had one of the rounds Jacob and I debated in that went very badly for us was when I, as the MO, didn't kick out of a disad properly, and so there was still a bit of a link, and the PMR just went for the link turn and exploded it and used it to outweigh the K. Jacob's got a quizzical look on his face.
What round was that?
That was King James and Erwig.
Oh.
That's an example of what not to do in the MO. We were crushing them on the rest of the debate, but I was sloppy kicking out of the disad, and James Miller was a very, very sneaky PMR, and he just stood up and he's like, well, that's cool, but you guys are going to lose. And we did. It was very sad. So there's that. You have to consider the fact that in a lot of cases you're weighing against disparate impacts. Sometimes the AF can only do so much. You get a resolution that you're stuck to, and you may only be able to solve for several hundred people that are oppressed, something like that. And the disad, say the disad is politics, they get to make up these absurd stories about how extinction is going to happen if you pass your plan because the Republicans gonna get real mad. This is another reason why strategy is important, and I've got another slide that talks about preparation, but making sure that you are set up from the get-go to outweigh against high magnitude, low probability impact is gonna help you because the negative team can read whatever they want as an impact, you're kind of stuck with what the AF does, so it's very important to be strategic in that way. Also leveraging action, this is something that's most important in critique debates, the fact that your plan actually does something in the real world, and that's important. That's what you're going to want to be doing to say why your solvency matters more than whatever the critique does. Yeah?
Okay, so I just wanted, because you said something that was really cool, weighing against disparate impacts.
Yeah.
So you're saying like even though the neg would have some like crazy story about how the Republicans are gonna get mad and it's gonna somehow cause nuclear war, something that the PMR can say is just weighing it by magnitude versus probability. Like, yeah, that could happen, but the likelihood of that happening is so slim, and you think that's like the best strategic.
Yeah, that's just impact comparison.
Okay.
So, and you need to do impact comparison if you just think about it. Think about like how you would initially react if you were presented with the two impacts. Like, you solve for systemic poverty in one area versus they prevent extinction. Sounds like the disad is going to be the biggest and most important impact, right? So you need to make sure you're doing the work to explain why what you solve for matters more than their ridiculous story, and that means going for those impact takeout arguments that say why it's not likely.
So much worse than
Yeah.
our little thing.
So what the PMR gets to do is the comparison where you say, look, we're way farther ahead on probability. Probability matters more for these reasons. What the MG needs to say to set up that is like impact defense on the disad that says their story about how states will go to war as a result of this because the GOP backlashes and then like causes some relations bill to not pass and then something like that. The MG needs to be cutting out the steps along the way that get them to their impact, and that way the PMR has some extra help. You can say not only is it just in general not probable, but they've also conceded an argument that says states don't go to war with each other because the economic costs are too high. Something like that. What's up, class?
No,
You're just chuckling.
Even argument?
Interdependence?
Yeah.
No, that's just
I mean,
that's a real world argument.
no, I mean,
No states go to war. Certainly not nuclear war.
But in debate land, it happens all the time.
It does. It happens every day in our heads, 6 or 7 times. It's awful.
Have you ever seen, what's it called? It's like a jail, super jail. It's like on Cartoon Network. It's just like this whole absurd like reality, and it looks like it's on acid. Like it's like an acid trip, right? Every time I say Debateland, like I always picture like the beginning of Super Jail. Check it out. It's on Adult Swim. I think you might like it just based on like your kind of humor that I see.
I'll check
That's
it
how I
out.
think of Debateland, like Super Jail.
Just like acid. What?
If you like home movies, there's a chance you'll like Super Jail.
Okay. Cool. So this is a little more about how to be strategic. Again, collapsing is super important. Try to spend time on as few arguments as you can and develop them really well. Sit on arguments when you have to. You know that it's like you can't afford to spend a little bit of time on every argument because the MO probably already did that and they had 8 minutes and you have 5 minutes. So it's definitely quality over quantity. And again, picking your key arguments, thinking ahead. This is important for selecting what impact you want to go for. So again, say you have an advantage that solves for a small amount of systemic poverty, and then you also have like a hedge advantage that talks about war with China or something. If you know the disad is that something like trying to think of an example, like a small regional conflict or something, they solve for a regional conflict. You're probably thinking, okay, we can definitely outweigh this with war with China. In that case, it might make sense for the PMR to focus primarily on winning access to Advantage 2, because you know that if you can solve Advantage 2, the benefits of stopping war with China are going to outweigh the benefits of avoiding the disad being regional war, which would be smaller than war with China. So in that case, you might not spend as much time talking about your systemic poverty impact, because even though it obviously matters, it's harder to weigh against regional war, especially if they have high probability of that, which is sometimes happens. So you want to be thinking ahead when you're listening to the block and listening to what they're going for, thinking what arguments what access or what impacts do we have that we could use to beat these, and then once you've done that, putting in the time to do it. It's similar to me in the MO when the MG might read a ton of answers to the offense that you go for. Say you really want to go for politics, but they read like 15 answers. That doesn't matter if their answers aren't good. So what matters is that politics is the impact that you need to outweigh the AF. So it's worth taking the time in the MO to wade through all those arguments and go for it. Similarly with the PMR, if the impact is what you're going to need to win the round, so work backwards from there. Pick what you need to outweigh the offense from the negative and do the work to win it, even if it means not answering everything on Advantage 1 or Advantage 2. Pick the one that you want to go for and sit on it. Comparison, super important again, if you get in those situations where you have kind of a hazy, I'm not sure which impact is bigger, being as explicit as possible and making it very, very clear to the judge, spell it out for them why your arguments, your impacts, you get better access to them, they're more specific, they tell you, you have a scenario and they just have this general thing that maybe things will get better. Being as comparative as possible will never hurt you and will usually help you. And be sneaky, because sometimes they miss things and you can just make a big deal out of it, and perceptually that will really help you. Even if the argument itself may not be a round winner, if you can leverage things against the block and then explode those, then it definitely puts you ahead perceptually and often helps you on the ballot. What's up?
I'd like to add one thing. You should use the neg against them. I mean, a lot of times most neg strategies have holes in them, or they say things that they maybe don't fully understand, or it hasn't shelled out fully in the round.
Yeah.
And it's an opportunity for you to also gain leverage against their neg strat or whatever it is, in your PMR, using their own thing against them, which is a very effective way to win or beat a disad. Do that impact comparison and make your case outweigh.
Yeah. Yeah, the PMR is the speech where you get to kind of tell them what's up, and so the more you can be perceptually in control that way by saying look, we understand what you went for, you don't understand it, and you don't understand why you're losing compared to the app. That's what you want to do. Okay, so impact calculus, we've talked about this a little bit, but again, the three main ones are magnitude, probability, and time frame. There are other standards like strength of link is one. Some people like to say specificity, so if you have similar size impacts, then saying that your impact is more specific, there's a real scenario, then that can be one. Did I already say reversibility? I don't think so. That's another one. If one impact can be reversed, then that's a reason why it's not as important as one that cannot be reversed, or so people say. you can come back from dehumanization, but you can't come back from death. Kind of like that, I guess. At least that's what I hear.
Only in a southern accent, though.
Yeah, well, and really nasally, and try to constrict your throat as much as possible when you say it. Like that. What if? Well, a little bit of Joe Allen slip in there sometimes. It's good for you. Any questions about impact calc? Yeah, it's kind of a thing you probably already talked about, but. Okay, so preparation for the PMR. I strongly believe that winning the PMR is very dependent on writing a good AF. So that means, remember that you want to think from the end game, what the end game is going to be. That means impacts. So making sure that the impacts in the affirmative are good and that they are diverse is super important. You can't win a round without a good impact, as long as the negative has good impacts too. So one thing you can also do is just think about what they're likely to read. If it's like some controversial bill, then there's a good chance they're going to read politics. Think about what the most common politics scenarios at the tournament are, and prepare for those. Say everyone's, what was one, like a deficit scenario or debt default scenario, something like that. You know that there's going to be like an economic impact that says that this happens to the stock market and then a bunch of people don't get food anymore. Think about how you can outweigh that, or how you can be more probable. Another one might be like if it's a topic that's probably going to piss off Russia, think about what the Russia impact is going to be and structure your advantages to outweigh or even turn a Russia disad. I'm a big fan of PMCs that are tricky in that way, that can like link turn the disad and then the negative gets up and reads their arguments and they don't realize that the AF straight turns the neg. So diversifying advantages is super important. We've talked a little bit about what that might look like, but again, having maybe a smaller scale but high probability impact, like solving for something systemic, and then having another impact that's a flashpoint impact, like war between states, I think is really helpful because it gives you options. It means that you might lose the small debate, but you still have a big one, or you might lose the flashpoint conflict scenario, but you can extend arguments about why systemic poverty matters more. Gave a lecture on impact framing. I don't know how many of you were there, but that's another thing that you can do. It's a trick you can work into the PMCs. Include framing arguments that say, like, solving for systemic issues is most important for a number of reasons. First might be that they're 100% probable. If something systemic is happening, if there's systemic poverty, then we know it's there, it's verifiable, right? And that's a reason to prefer it to this nonsense scenario about Russia going to war with us, which would never happen. You might also say that our impact solves for people who are on the periphery of most security decisions. So say that you do something that wouldn't be a security decision, I guess, but like say that you solve for some disenfranchised group and you give them access to rights that they don't have in the status quo. You can make arguments about why that's important because traditionally when we make policy calculations, we ignore those people. So solving for them is more important than solving for people who are generally treated well. That's an argument you can make. Other impact framing arguments. You can talk about why the kind of calculative logic that goes into certain disadvantages is destructive, like thinking we should never act if there's a 1% risk of extinction means that we could never do anything. So if we know that the plan is a good idea and it's going to solve for poverty, we probably shouldn't care that there's like a 0.009 chance that extinction happens as a result of the plan, something like that. Those are arguments you can build into the PMC to leverage against whatever they're going to be doing, and then the MG would extend them, you blow them up in the PMR and say, look, at the end of the debate, even if they get this tiny risk of a link, we've already extended framing that says why you should reject those types of arguments. In the MG is also super important for the PMR because the round can be won or lost in the MG, and making sure the MG extends key impacts and the access to them is super important. So talking, even during prep with your MG and saying, look, I think they're going to read this, or even if you don't know what they're going to read, make sure you extend this link argument or these link arguments and make sure we get access to this impact. A good MG will know how to do that anyway, but as long as you have access there from the MG, then the PMR is set up. Some people like to say there are always outs in the PMR. Often that's true, but it's not always true. So making sure that the MG knows which arguments you want to be going for, and I'm a really big proponent of just talking a lot during the round, like partners talking with each other about what's happening and what we want to do strategically. I think that really helps for everyone to be on the same page. Also, in the MG, making sure that you're paying a lot of attention to the choke points of negative offense. So on the critique, making sure that the MG is dumping all over the perm, or the alt page with the permutation, and talking before about like what the PMR's favorite disadvantages to the alternative are, or favorite perm arguments to go for are, because if you're debating the K, you need to be, the AF is going to need to win the perm in nearly all situations. So making sure that you're familiar with the arguments you're going to be reading, make sure the MG reads them and gets them out quickly, those things will all make for a better debate, because it means you know, as soon as you hear the K, okay, at the end of the round we're probably going to have to go for this disadvantage to the alt, or something like that. The more of the debate you can learn before going into it with generic stuff like that, the easier it will be for you. Always know what your default outs are going to be. So the PMR, and let's see, I guess I didn't finish this example, so we'll go back. I wanted to kind of spell out what example would be, like just an example PMR, how to follow that same formula. And I guess we can go back to it, and then I'll throw out an example. So let's see, say the AF is militarily intervene in Syria. I guess I'll put this, do that, put it on the board. Does anyone know how to do this without screen?
Yeah.
Thanks. I'm no teacher.
I hope I can hit it.
Struggle is real.
Maybe try not pulling it so down.
This guy. Klaus, you can, I totally neglected the board that was 90 degrees to my right.
Oh, well, there you go.
Okay, so we've got our formula. Say the res USFG should. Nobody's heard this topic before, right? In Syria. So what might the AF be for this? Let's go plan, and then A1, A2.
Strategic strikes, well, no-fly zone.
No-fly zone. All right, everybody. What are some advantages to a no-fly zone in Syria?
Ends the conflict.
Can't bomb. Can't bomb them.
Can't bomb them. So, saving lives. What are some impacts that we might have on saving lives?
No more dead kids.
Dehumanization.
And always in that voice. Cool. We've got two different types of impact modules there, kind of modules. Different ways of framing the same terminal result, or similar things related to that scenario. What about advantage 2?
Hedge.
Anybody else? Serby really likes writing the PMC.
Economic stability.
Sure.
Let's read.
And how might we'll get there? Okay, so stab, not written well. Not my strong suit. Okay, so we have economic stab, and what are the impacts of that?
Extinction.
It affects globally, because like when state goes down or has an economic downfall, it somehow affects other places.
Resource war.
Is that Klaus? Okay, I thought that was the voice. I was going to be really impressed if that was Hunter doing the Klaus impersonation. So we've got global POV, and then we have resource wars. How do we make resource wars go to game over? Yeah.
Use ISIS.
Well, I mean, like, what's the impact of
There's
resource
force
wars?
of attrition, which means that nuclear weapons would become justified because there's no longer an economic cost to using them because you have to be able to secure the resources, which means if nuclear war happens and everybody dies.
Everybody dies. Everybody dies.
Everybody.
Even I die.
It's gonna be ERR. Oh.
Huh?
Yeah,
Wait, where?
ERR for everybody.
Earbud. I was gonna do that too. Earbud.
There you go.
Maybe like a apostrophe
BDY,
D.
yeah.
Advantage 3. Fish
No.
tribute concerts.
No, that's the counterplan. The counterplan would solve the hell out of that. Always read the fish counterplan. Okay, so now we see we built a PMC that has a bunch of different impacts and impact modules. You have advantage 1, saving lives, no dead kids. Stop and dehume. Those things matter. Smaller scale, targeted, but the plan probably solves them, or at least you should have arguments built into the PMC as to why you can save lives in Syria. Otherwise, you should pick a different plan text. We have XDAB over here, advantage 2, solving for global poverty. This is a good impact because it's a wider range, it's something else. So even if you don't get anything, can't save the lives, you know, at least you can stop, I don't know, the trade from being blown up in Syria. Presumably, that's the arg we will make, and that can stop the ripple effects that cause global poverty as a result of economic collapse, something like that. And you also have resource wars, which lead to extinction, where Airbud dies, and that's important. Lots of impact modules, cool. What would the next rat be? What's the Western Washington, or I guess Willamette, favorite strategy?
Assassinate Assad.
Yes. I guess.
Oh, sorry. Mossad should assassinate Assad.
So this is what the neg would write?
Yes.
Did you ask a question though?
Is that up there? Yeah. Israel.
That would be like Syria surrenders, or
So-
Assad surrenders.
Aside from.
I'm gonna
Moss
just
is ass.
ask to.
To the
okay,
second
never
power.
mind. Yeah.
I mean,
Ass. I guess it's ass, and it. God, that's a stupid word.
Assassin.
We got 3 of them in there. Cool. So a lot of butts and also killing Assad. So, what's
Moss?
Mossad? Sorry, trying to be clever. So thanks. What's the disadd to the no-fly zone,
Politics and Russia relations.
and why?
Because what do you mean why?
I mean, why is okay? I'm just trying to get you to spell out why the plan causes that and the counterplan avoids it.
U.S. action would trigger the links on politics
Boom.
and also anger.
Right, because the counterplan is using a different actor. Israel's hacksaws, spies, PA, Russia. So, fast forward to the MG, fast forward through the MG. The block picks which disad do they want to pick? Anyone?
Russia.
Yeah! Russia. What are the impacts to just war, huh? People die.
What's ticks? I just,
Politics. Yeah. What's our impact on doesn't matter.
Extinction.
Not going for extinction. I don't know why they picked war with Russia over extinction, but presumably this goes to Airbud dies. EBD. Cool. So block goes for the disad. Block might say probability, high prob, kind of, high mag for sure. Right? Because war is bad, Airbud dies. Oh, time frame. Because war with Russia happens immediately. Your ability to save the dead kids might not happen immediately, and this is a long-term impact because global POV takes a long time to stop, and also economic stability. It's like we need it to stop the chance that there's global poverty, but we can't guarantee that this particular action is going to stop global POV from happening immediately. Same with resource wars. We don't know when those resource wars are going to happen. There's just kind of an assumption that if the economy goes down because we don't do the plan. Yeah. So, if you were the AF giving the PMR, which impact would you want to go for?
And go for the RBILT.
No.
which impact?
Yeah,
Everybody dies.
everybody dies.
Extinction.
Hell yeah. I mean, you know. So we want, okay. I will reframe the question, because I think I'm not being super clear. Okay, we're in a situation where the negative team has gone all in on a disadvantage with, well, I guess kind of like medium probability. Mid to low. I'll say low mid. There. Low mid probability.
Step from high.
High mag. Ultra high. Ultra high. Always use stupid abbreviations. Time frame. What do we know about these impacts? What do we know about these impacts? Which ones do we want to go for?
I go for the descent on the
Those go
counterplan.
slower, these go faster. Meaning
Right.
it happens sooner.
Okay.
Wait.
Understand.
What was the question?
Yeah, the question is, if we know that they have a low probability but high magnitude and high time frame argument, disad, offense that they're going for, what do we want to pick to outweigh that?
High probability, yeah, no, high
The
probability.
yeah.
Yeah, boom. And presumably you'd have some sweet arguments in here as to why you should always prefer impacts that deal with like structural oppression and violence, which arguably is what's going on there, and also, I mean, they are probably on the periphery at this point. I mean, nobody even talks about the Syrian conflict anymore. You can make arguments like that. So, your impact framing arguments have set this up. That's the offense you want to go for, and they're going for this offense. So, what does that PMR look like? If we're using our Joe Hyken strategy for success.
Spend a lot of time talking about why high probability outweighs magnitude and time frame.
Boom. So, yeah, PMR needs to be doing all of the impact calc, because if you let them get away with their tiny probability, it will crush you in the magnitude and time frame debate, because you won't be able to save all that many people. Hey, Hunter, stop. Okay, so probability, got to do that. That's the macro comparison thing, right? You're going to be, and it's also securing access. What else?
So picking your offense, because like you're picking what you're going for and kind of picking out of something that isn't maybe as probable and it has basically the same amount of magnitude and a longer time frame.
Yeah.
Getting rid of your advantage too.
Exactly, yeah. So realizing that you might concede advantage two because it's not going to be able to do very much for you. And also, the counter plan, assassinating Assad, presumably also solves economic stability because it ends the war. Or they will make that argument. So you recognize advantage two doesn't get you very much. This is where you want to be spending your time because an impact that matters and is probable cuts against these.
Would we say, I'm just gonna go ahead and concede advantage two,
I mean, you can say it that way, yeah. I think commonly what people say is like,
or advantage
we're
one
going for
kills it,
advantage
yeah,
one.
okay.
Probability is going to be the most important part of the debate at the end of the round. Advantage two is a wash because counterplane solves, we don't care, moving on. And then you'd spend time elsewhere. Is that a hand, Klaus?
Yeah,
What's up?
it is. I mean, you can say like, oh, we take out Assad, so there's probably a low chance of Russia engaging in weapon or like being engaging in sort of conflict because they don't have stable communications with Syria, and you prefer advantage one or something.
Sure. So what part of the process of the PMR is that?
You probably, I mean, it would be impact calculus at the end of the day. I mean, because you'd be weighing the probability of Russia going to war, and you'd be using an argument that says Russia would be less likely to go to war in this situation because their main communication, with Syria, like the Syrian regime. So it's like,
Okay.
they're probably gonna hold back and wait till things shake down.
Okay, yeah, so this is an example of using an argument from the debate to explain why there's a low probability of the dissent. This is doing, remember, in order to win that this impact matters, you also need to win that they have low probability of their impact. So this is a way to neutralize their offense and say, look, the MG does a pretty good job of explaining this and the bloc does not engage with this. The fact that Russia, like, their main interest in Russia would be wiped out as a result of the plan, or their main interest in Syria would be wiped out as a result of the plan means that they're likely to wait before they go to war with us. Mitigation of the probability of the impact, that helps you when you're going for a high probability impact. There's also the meta framing arguments like saying why probability matters, and that's a different thing, but you would talk about it at the same time. You'd say probability is the most important way to weigh impacts for these reasons. We're winning the most high probability impact. Time frame is silly, magnitude is silly. Time frame is harder to prove it's silly, but magnitude certainly is easier. So with those types of framing arguments, you say, this is the way that you should look at impacts, their probability, and we're winning the highest probability impact. What else might we want? We're kind of running low on time, huh? So did we win?
No.
No. Why didn't we win, Jacob?
MG dropped out.
What did we say about
I feel
the ticks? What did we say about the ticks?
About ticks, right, so we didn't talk about what the arguments would have been, but in this situation, remember the PMR is responding to the block, what the block goes for, what the MO extends and the LOR says this is our offense. What that means is that they probably kicked out of politics. The MG probably beat up on politics, which they should because it's a silly argument. And that means that politics doesn't matter anymore. They're not going for that. They spent their entire 12-minute speech talking about why Russia is going to outweigh the plan. Cool.
So why don't we do this again?
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm
we
kind of
totally do.
curious.
We totally do, because we went on probability.
And probability is super, super rad. Yeah. Cool. Well, that's all the time we got. If you want to talk about other PMR things, like the PMR for certain rounds, like going for theory or going for the critique, you can find me, because I was going to talk about those a bit, but I think it's helpful to think about what you see most of the time. So.
There's like 2 more PMR classes coming up, so.
Oh yeah, and one of them is Hyken's, right?
What's the next one?
Yeah. Sweet, that's gonna be really good. He gave some awesome rebuttals.
Do you think he'll pull up the same slide?
You should ask him why he didn't.
I'm sure I'll go to his lecture.
I'm going to the
Yeah. Joe is an awesome rebuttalist. His PMRs were the best. So, any other questions about the PMR? Cool.
Right,
Thanks, everybody.